This meeting is now being recorded.
So your treatment team, I'm going to call it the IFSP team, feels there's a need to assign a specialist to develop strategies. So how would you deal with that situation?
Well, that wouldn't be a team then, if the one person's just going to develop all the strategies.
Yeah, okay, that's a very good point. But say you need some specialized knowledge. How could you still develop the initial IFSP and still get someone in to provide that specialized knowledge? Because I really like what you said here, that you would never rely on one person to develop the strategies. So if you have a child for whom you feel like the right people aren't at the table to really work together to develop the strategies, then it may be that you're going to need to review the IFSP. It may be that you could write in a consult and then review the IFSP. So there's a variety of ways you could handle it. But if you really feel that you don't have the expertise at the table to develop the IFSP, then it's probably best that you get together again with someone that does have that expertise.
And I guess we do that because, like, Anchor Center for Blind Children can only come to our area once every 3 months to see our visually impaired children, and our OT usually, you know, our team, our developmental interventionists, we need that expertise, but they only come once every 3 months. So we do have a meeting when they get to come and, really focus on those things.
Yeah.
Thank
you. That's good. Okay, was there another one in the... Okay, here's another one. I haven't figured out how to fund having providers and child find teams attend the IFSP training. Yes, there isn't a ready source of funding from EI to do that. How have others... I know from being in the IFSP training that there are a lot of child find folks and providers there. So how have you guys in communities where that's happening made that happen?
This is Beth from RMHS.
Hi, Beth.
Hi. We do have our providers attend the IFSP training, and we just request that they do it within the first year that they're contracted with us.
And you don't pay them for that?
We do not pay them to do that. It's just one of the trainings like universal precautions or the COAST training that we have them attend.
Thank you. Anyone else? So, Beth, you actually have that in your kind of your preferred contractors?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
So they would get referrals ahead of someone who has not yet been to the IFSP training.
Great. Thank you. That's really helpful. How about child find teams? Has anyone had any effective strategies for getting child find teams to come? Either to the state IFSP trainings or there's some questions in the chat around local provider meetings and trainings as well. Okay. I think that a lot of this may be related to how your EI director is working with your interagency teams and your collaborative teams, because I know that there are child find teams that come, and it's usually related to just the talk that's happening at the local level about how to best collaborate to support children. So for those of you that know that your child find teams have attended the IFSP training, has it helped you work more collaboratively together? sounds like no one has experience with that. And then we have a couple more things in the chat box. I don't think one training is sufficient for providers, child finds, or service coordinators. It takes a lot of practice and teamwork. I absolutely agree with that. I think that ongoing support is really, really helpful. And is there anyone that has a way that they're supporting each other as service coordinators and other team members at the local level? How do you guys talk to each other at the local level? You just come to the state training and that's it, or are you growing your skills through support by either your service coordination team lead or your EI director or your local program? We do show in the chat box that one community had their evaluation teams come to the state training and it has helped. And then we have a comment here that said if trainings were more local, they might be more willing or able to attend. And also it's difficult because of staff changes, and I absolutely recognize that. Wayla Murrow, our EI specialist, last week sent out a query to all the CCBs to talk about supporting the IFSP training in your local communities. So your EI directors got that, so we hope that we will be able to move the training around a little bit more this year than we have been able to do in the past. Oh, and here we have a suggestion that to email other service coordinators and phone calls between service coordinators and then service coordinator meetings. So those of you that do have service coordinator meetings, what happens in those meetings? I heard giggling. Is that what happens in the meetings?
Laura, this is Karina.
Hi.
So we have bi-weekly meetings with our service coordinators, and, you know, we talk about what we're going through and, like, updates and share ideas.
Good. And is that helpful?
Yes.
That's great. Wonderful. Yeah, it's so helpful to get together with other service coordinators and just have the time to share. There's some frustration noted in the chat about a lack of time to use materials, and some concern about service coordinators getting frustrated when they're met with others that are kind of not on the same page. And I recognize those are definitely difficulties. And then there's some other strategies here using peer file reviews. I think that's a great strategy. And to talk about the IFSP and any new forms updates, great idea to do in your service coordination meeting. So we're going to move on and just look at a few slides that will give you some research and strategies around writing outcomes. So the first slide that we're looking at here is this slide that has the cute little gears on it. And those gears say functional assessment and meaningful IFSP outcomes. Those are linked together. You can't separate them. So these are just some important things to consider. You have to know how to gather information in a way that's functional. Trish, your idea of relating it back to the functional child outcomes was a great idea. To always think about what's working and challenging in their everyday activities. Yasmin, I think you talked about that. That children learn best through participation in everyday activities, and remember that that is based in evidence, that it actually supports the best developmental growth for children, because I think that's an important piece as well. And then how to use this information to develop the IFSP meeting. So here's your little steps. You're going to talk about how do we get to functional IFSP outcomes. So you have to think about it within each step of the process, beginning with initial contacts and referrals. Are we gathering information in a way that's going to lead us to understanding what the life of that child and family looks like, what goes well, and what is challenging? We're going to think about that from the very beginning. When we're gathering information, we're going to keep that in mind. When we do evaluation and assessment, we keep that in mind, especially family assessment. And then we're going to think about functional IFSP outcomes within family routines. And it is important to note that outcomes always reference the family's concerns and priorities within their routine. Here's just some steps to think about. Start with the parents' concerns, not the interventionist or teachers' priorities. And I left teachers in there. This came from one of our federal presentations. I left teachers in there because it's relevant to the fact if you are working with a family that is receiving support within an early learning environment, such as child care as well. And then think about what's working in everyday routines and activities. This is a great question to ask. What would your family like to see happen for your child and family? And I think, Yasmin, you did a great job of talking about some further questions that could be asked. How would it make it, in what times of the day would it make the most difference for your child and family if the child could exhibit this skill? Those kind of things we need to think about. Now, we're going to talk briefly, which you haven't really talked about. We've mostly talked about child outcomes, which are outcomes related to the child's participation. But there are two kinds of outcomes, child outcomes and family outcomes. So we're just going to take a minute to look at an example of those outcomes. This is what we think about in child outcomes. We're thinking about the child's engagement, how to enhance the child's development, their child's social relationships, and their independent participation. And then we're going to think about what could be achieved in a time not longer than 6 months. So there's the measurable piece. What skill needs to happen in 6 months to get to the larger concern and priority identified by the family? Outcome statements need to include behavior. What do you want the child's participation to look like? The details that make it measurable, in what routine the activity is going to take place, and then if there are any other conditions associated with it. That could be like the use of a picture recognition system or something like that. Here's another kind of checklist. I included a few of these to help you afterwards so you can use this as a resource. So think about this when you're developing an outcome. What's the area? Remember, it has to be functional. What's the routine? How is the child going to participate? And then what do we want to see that routine look like if the outcome has been accomplished? So here's a couple examples. Here's an example of a child outcome. Romeo will play with toys and eat meals with his family by sitting without support for 15 minutes. So do you see how that's related to a routine that's identified by the family? We can see what that routine should look like in 6 months and what the family would like it to look like. Now, Romeo will improve muscle tone for sitting is not an outcome. That may be a result of some of the strategies we're going to put in place to help Romeo eat more effectively for 15 minutes, but that's not the outcome. So here is an example of a family outcome. Now, a family outcome is an outcome that really just uses resources that a service coordinator might help a family access. So see, what if you're talking with a family and you ask them what their main concern is, and they say, we want to be able to take Romeo with us in the car, and we need a travel car seat. Well, we don't have car seats as an early intervention service, but that's still important information for us to know. So how could we write those out? Let's look at the next slide. So you'll see that as child outcomes are always focused on the child's participation within the identified routines of their family, family outcomes also are always focused on the family. So we're not writing an outcome for ourselves, which would be staff will explore options for financial assistance for travel shares. We're going to write an outcome. Karen and Mark will learn about resources and low-cost options so they can obtain a car seat, because we don't need to write outcomes for ourselves. Now, could that be a strategy, then not this? Come on, don't be shy.
And that really be an outcome.
I couldn't hear you. Okay, well, we're going to move on. Just know that family outcomes, great. Yes, it can. Thank you. I'm sorry, from where I'm sitting, I have a glare and I can't read the chat. So thank you. Yes, that's right. We're going to write the outcome with the focus around the family, but then the things that we're going to do as a staff would absolutely be strategies to help Karen and Mark get resources that they need and obtain a car seat. Great. Thank you for putting that in the chat box. So I'm going to open it up for questions again now that we've just looked at the components of outcomes for a minute. But I will want you to notice that on this slide, I put two really good resources that you can use for local. You can use it at your service coordination meetings. You can use it yourselves if you have interagency meetings, if you meet with your child find teams or your providers. I gave you a couple really good resources here. One is, it's called a briefcase, but it's a resource that actually goes through tips for developing good participation-based IFSP outcomes. It's about 6 pages long. It's a great resource. The second part is an actual training activity that you can use. You can take the outcomes from the IFSPs that you've actually developed in your community, and you can rate them using this training activity, and then discuss how you can make those become more functional and more family-friendly. So those are two really good tools that are available for free on the web that I wanted you to have. So we're going to open it up for questions really briefly. Does anyone have anything right now? Has anything come into in the chat that's a question? Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Hi, this is Heather Zimmerman.
Hi, Heather.
Hi. Listen, our firewall in the school building isn't letting us get into the webinar. So is there any way to email us that slide set?
It'll be posted on the EI website.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome, Heather. Sorry you weren't able to get on.
Okay.
Okay. So this is Juanita, and we're going to move on to our next very broad topic area. And this is, again, I just want to reiterate that this is an opportunity for you to share areas that you're struggling with as part of your role as service coordinator, and how you want the state to be aware of it so that we can support you at the local level, so your EI directors can support you. So the next area we're going to talk about is working with difficult and contentious situations, and that's pretty broad, and we realized that and wanted to open it up to what is hard about this job, what areas are you struggling with that we can potentially provide some support with. It could be related to working with Child Find. It could be related to the system. It could be related to the rules and regs, families, funding.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I think two people were talking at the same time. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Missy from North Metro.
Hi, Missy.
Hi. I was going to mention that sometimes it's a difficult situation when providers will describe an incident that happens in the home or things that they have concerns about, and then they're kind of asking you whether they think they should report or not.
Oh, okay. And how do you handle that?
Usually I kind of put it back in their hands. If you feel that this is a serious incident, or if you feel that the child is in danger, then you're, responsible to report. I was not there for the incident, so I can't tell you whether you should report or not report.
Right. That can be really challenging, and that's something that we discussed with the EI coordinators at the statewide meeting, and one of the points I thought was a really good point that was brought up, that sometimes a provider will state that they don't feel safe, but they're not willing to report, and, it was brought forth that perhaps if the provider themselves doesn't feel safe, that it's probably not a safe situation for the child. And I thought that was a really interesting point. Others, do others have experiences with that, or good strategies to support Missy with that?
This is Yasmin, and when providers get like that, I will go sometimes to the home visit, and then since we're mandatory reporters, we will call social services and also have conversations with them, because some of these families are already involved with social services anyway, coming through captive referral. But I think what's most challenging is we're seeing a lot of families with the meth, and there's court, and they're still in the home and just working. And you do feel, and you call social services threatened, but nothing is done. And so eventually, just an example, I had a family, it took a year, and then the child just, we've had children die in our services this year too, so because of the neglect and abuse and other things. So it's just we go as teams so that no one feels alone. Like the service coordinator will just attend with the provider so they don't feel threatened or scared.
Which is a great strategy. It's a great strategy, and that it can be really difficult. And just so you know that is definitely a priority of our program here at the state, and we're working really closely with child welfare to give you more support and more strategies on supporting those families, because it's also challenging when you are a mandated reporter and you're trying to develop a relationship with a family, and the whole trust issue after you've reported and going back into the home. And so really giving you some strategies around that. We have a chat in the chat box from Amanda. We have a rep from DHS coming to provide an in-service. We also encourage the provider to touch base with their lead for guidance when they're unsure. Typical rule of thumb is anytime we feel a child is unsafe, it's reportable, and then leave it up to DHS to investigate and make a determination. Yeah, it's really good. And then we have another one in the chat. We will be requiring providers to attend an annual Maine training as part of their contract signing. Our service coordinators will also receive this training on a regular basis. Lauren, will you write out what Maine stands for?
And I have a question, too, when you get a chance.
Okay, go ahead with your question.
Just wondering if anybody has any safety protocols or procedures in place, especially in rural communities, self-defense training when you're sending providers into, sending a service coordinator out for a home visit, rural area, sometimes no cell phone access. Just safety protocol, if anybody has anything in place for that.
Trish, I know that at the state meeting, in one of the breakouts I was at, there were some communities that had some of those in place. And I'm not sure who those were, but you could certainly send out a query.
And we will provide those. So as part of, we're going to post a link on our website to this call. So it'll be the PowerPoint slides and the recording. And then we have a resource called Padlet that we can put any kind of resources that you might need access to. So if you do have like a safety handbook or protocol that you're using, if you can email those to Lenita, I can post those for us all to access.
Great, thank you.
MAIN stands for Mistreatment, Abuse, Neglect, and Exploitation. And Lauren, who is conducting the MAIN training for you? That might be a good resource for everyone to be aware of. And then in the chat we have, we made a call to DSS about a dangerous situation with oxygen and smoking in the home, and several months later the mother, man using the oxygen, and 2 children died in a fire caused by oxygen. So, it's so hard. It's very painful when these things happen. And being aware of all risks, meth is an obvious one, but sometimes we don't think about oxygen as much as some other things. Vicki Folkerts is sharing Safe Care as a wonderful resource for at-risk families, and I will certainly post information related to Safe Care on the Padlet as well. Let's see, another chat. Providers are unwilling to be transdisciplinary. Across all areas, there is a disconnect between how to follow and implement the EI program. There seems to be a us versus them mentality with providers, child find families, and service coordinators. Laura, do you want to address the transdisciplinary piece?
Sure. I think that is absolutely true. It can be a disconnect, and I think it often falls back to the service coordinator to try and pull this together and constantly be reflecting back on the concerns and priorities of the family. When we're talking about a disconnect with various entities, we are working a lot at the state level to try and make that collaboration smoother and support greater collaboration at the local level. When we're talking about transdisciplinary, some of the reason I believe providers are unwilling to work in transdisciplinary teams is just that we haven't been able to provide good support around what that really means. And so I'm going to take a note of that, because I'm hoping that is something that we can provide some resources around as we move forward with really looking at that as an evidence-based practice that supports children and families within the participation in their families' routines. So thank you for that.
And that disconnect piece, it's really difficult, especially I know a lot of your communities are dependent on agencies that are more of a medical model in their thinking, and so really educating agencies within your community on what the EI model means and the parent focus and the education focus, it can be challenging, and it's almost thinking about your 30-second elevator speech about what EI is and saying that over and over again to everyone you talk to. It can be exhausting to do that. And it is challenging within the state of Colorado and the way that our system is set up with that us versus them model, and how we can really be one cohesive system is hard when our system isn't set up that way, and that's another piece that we are really focused on at the state level, and are going to be working with our partners at CDE over the summer to really see how we can ease some of that thinking, because we realize that is a challenge. So Lauren shared that the main training is an internal training they developed with CTAT for their adult customers, and they've adapted the training to be more specific to children. And Lauren, I don't know if you are willing to share that with us. We'd love to see it if you are. So another comment in the chat, our BOCES say they have never done transdisciplinary evaluations.
I'm going to respond to that because really the transdisciplinary model is not related to evaluations. It's related to service provision. So what's required in early intervention is a multidisciplinary evaluation, so you have more than one provider looking at all areas of how the child is developing. But when we talk about transdisciplinary in early intervention, we're really talking about the model in which one primary provider is working with the child and family, and then they're going back and on a regular basis they're sharing information and gathering information from providers of differing disciplines that then inform the strategies that they're going back and implementing with the family. So I think that if you're talking with evaluation teams about providing evaluations in a transdisciplinary model, they're not going to understand that, because when we talk about that, we're really talking about service provision.
So other comments in the chat, I feel so much always fall on the service coordinators, and it's really true. There are a lot of responsibilities to this position. Do you want to say more about that? Or programs that have had success with figuring out strategies to ease the burden of service coordinators. Does anyone want to share? That's a hard one, and it is an ongoing struggle. What would be helpful in terms of support as far as the responsibilities of service coordinators?
Hi, this is Missy from North Metro.
Hi, Missy.
Hi, I was just going to mention that what is working well is that our North Metro team works really well. So if I'm scheduled for an intake, but I'm scheduled for an evaluation, I can count on my team to cover or help support. And I think that even though we all know we have high caseloads, we can kind of hopefully rely on each other to support us to make sure it's happening for families.
Right. So you're really talking about you don't have, you have kind of role release within your own service coordination team, that you're saying, hey, I will support you, and then you'll step in to help that as well. Exactly. I also think that there is, thank you, Missy, that's really helpful. I think that there was a thing in the chat, too, around struggling with teams being family-friendly. And, you know, I think that can be a struggle, and that's another time where it really does come back to the service coordinator to say, to reflect on what you know about the family, to kind of take it on yourself to say, you know, I'm not sure I understand. Can you please explain that to me? The family is always involved and a contributing part of the team.
Yeah, and that goes for provider contact notes, too. And really, the family has the right to access their entire child record, and you know, reminding providers that this is a record for them. And so if it has too much medical jargon, it's not of value to the family. This is the family's document and documentation, and really keeping it family-oriented is super important.
I think that a common theme I'm seeing here is just that one of the things that is challenging for you as service coordinators is kind of having to be the glue that pulls everybody together when all the people that we have to work together to support children and families may not have the same knowledge base.
Okay. Yasmin has a comment. I might need some clarification, Yasmin. Providers tell many of a new concerns family should have in the family with health service coordinator and ask for meeting to increase or add new outcome with more services. So the providers
might tell a family. They might tell a family, oh, you should be concerned about this. So, and then, you as a service coordinator sometimes only have monthly contact with them, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, this is now a concern, and, and I'm like, oh, well, we had such a long, good conversation of a routines-based interview that, you're like, oh, okay, oh, where did the, so it's just, I don't know if I have to, of course, I'm like, okay, I see what you're saying. And I go back to their original concerns on the plan of action page. Say, okay, so when did you start? I guess, does that happen to people? Oh, I'm like, oh, it just didn't seem like a family priority or something the family would even think of. Not saying that they can't think of, other things, but, I have providers that will try to do that. And it's a constant, battle with them to keep, they just want to add their whole team, it seems like. So I don't know how other people are working with that or dealing with that.
Right, and really, pulling providers into the model and the philosophy of, and helping support families in that we don't need a million providers in the home for their child to make progress.
And in fact, that supported in evidence to not be as good a model for infants and toddlers. I think that that what you said, though, Yasmin, was a really good strategy, that you're reflecting back to the really functional concerns and priorities. And a lot of times I think that's what they may feel that their concern is very, very different because that's how the provider may have presented it. But when you bring it back to what's already on the plan and what's functional in nature, that you can show how it's related and how you're actually supporting that concern as well. But I absolutely agree that is an issue if you have providers that really aren't on board with the EI model of service provision, meaning implementing services under the key principles of service delivery. That's something we might want to put on the Padlet.
Laura?
Yeah.
Someone asked about how could we support the service coordinators more, and I had to reflect on it a little bit. But I think what it is from my point of view, it's like the service coordinators are always being told and trained and how to do, how it's supposed to be, how it's supposed to look, all of that. And then when they go out to practice that, every other person it's like it's swimming upstream. Mm-hmm. And that's so stressful. It's so tiring. I mean, I feel like I've been swimming up that stream for many years now. Yeah. And I think the way to support it is that the expectation wouldn't just be on the service coordinator, that more expectation would be on the other players, providers, child find, etc. I don't know how that could be, but that's just what I'm thinking.
Sue, this is Lenita, and it's a really good point. It's like telling, one child all these rules that they have to adhere to, but everybody else on the playground doesn't have to adhere to them, and that child's responsible for making sure that everyone is adhering to the rules. And it is really frustrating, and that's a piece that I think that at the state level we need to figure out how to provide more support for. And it is hard because of the way our system is set up that we are responsible for what happens with community-centered boards, but not so much what is happening with Child Find and other community partners. So that's definitely an area of concern.
Thank you.
Becky just wanted to clarify that when she was talking about the BOCES, that they have always only evaluated in the area of concern. They don't do multidisciplinary evaluations. I think that this is a concern, Becky, that we would like to follow up with you offline and have a discussion about. And if there are other service coordinators that have that same experience, please contact us here so we can follow up and support you with that, because it is a requirement that they do a multidisciplinary evaluation and assessment. So that's something that we need to support you with and address offline. Okay, so we need to move on to our next topic, but I do want to close with Joy's comment about that it would be helpful for service coordinators support to have mutual respect from everyone in the community, and that is, it is very important, because what you do is very critical. Without service coordinators, our whole system would be sunk. So we do need to make sure that there is mutual respect from everyone. So we're going to end this topic, but I really do want to encourage you to talk with your coordinators at the local level and keep this conversation going. And if there are questions that you feel that this team could help you with, please, or comments or suggestions for training, please let us know. Okay. So now I'm going to turn it over to Christy, and we're going to talk about transition.
All right, another very complicated topic we want to talk about is transition planning. And we know that there are 3 different major components, and we've added timelines this year to all of our transition activities. So as you know, the 3 components that you're all responsible for are ensuring that a transition plan is written for all children that are getting ready to transition out, and it's now part of the IFSP process. And we've always had it part of the IFSP, but the new regulations have now required it as part of the IFSP meeting, so the transition plan itself is not a separate activity. And then we have the requirement to notify the school districts or your local education agencies about children who are potentially eligible for Part B if the family has not opted out of that notification. And the third part of that is your transition conference requirement. And we're just trying to find out what pieces of transition are going well, what pieces of transition are really challenging, and why. And the transition seems to be one of the areas that our state continues to really struggle with. And we just want to kind of hear from you all. We had this discussion at the Early Intervention Statewide Coordinators meeting, but we feel it's really important to get your perspective from service coordinators as to what's really challenging about transition planning. Any thoughts? Is there one piece of transition planning that's more difficult? The notification, the plan, the conference? I see a comment that working with 2 school districts, one district is more open with schedules, and one seems to be more busy. That would be tricky for scheduling, wouldn't it?
Hi, this is Pauline. I feel the lack of help, if you would, from the school district on this manner. I think that's really what our issue is in our community.
Lack of help, meaning?
Like, you know, they're too busy to do this, and they don't see the magnitude of where these families are going through, and it's really, you know, a matter of taking the time and taking people through this process, and they are not making this effort, like, you know, they are not accountable whatsoever, and it's frustrating.
So do you feel like the Part C evaluations are kind of an afterthought?
No, I feel like when we request to meet with the school district for a conference or to meet with them at all and meet the timelines that the state gives us, the schools don't make this as a priority. It's just, you know, we're too busy, and, you know, like I don't understand really why they don't want to participate if they would.
And so what happens when you're trying to schedule a conference and the school district isn't finding the time to do it? What do you do?
Well, we have come to the school instead of making it at the family's home to make it easier for the school, and just being very flexible about it. And now we're in the process of having guidelines from the school district of what for the families, what to expect on this, you know, transition for them.
And do you find having the conferences at the school works for the families?
It depends on, you know, the disability that the child has. And, of course, some of the children already, their siblings are already at school, so parents are more familiar with the school. So, you know, it really varies.
Okay. Anything else?
This is Yasmin. I have families who, you know, we start talking about 2 years, 6 months, transition, if not 2 years, 3 months, and, you know, not, you know, how transition will affect them from Part C to Part B, talking about the steps and not wanting, you know, they're like, oh, I want to opt out, and then, but then changing their mind, or they're like, okay, can you just wait? How long do I have to wait before you can send that? And, you know, my child's just a baby. It's so scary. I said, you know, we can tour the preschool. We can, you know, we can kind of go through the whole process together. But, you know, just I feel like a lot of my parents lately seem like feeling pushed, you know, into going into preschool. But I'm like, no, you don't have to. You can keep your child at home till kindergarten, really. And I think families really making a decisive choice, but, you know, educating them and, you know, showing them the steps, and, you know, the guidebook is great, I think, but as a good resource. But I think just very indecisive, and, you know, can you just hold out and wait till the very last moment? But I'm like, you know, we have to schedule. This is the school districts, you know, have, you know, only certain times, you know, it's just, and we don't have a lot of choices in our area. Usually we serve 10 counties, and usually it's one preschool and, you know, per county, or maybe 2 if you're lucky, choices in that county that we serve. So lack of choices also.
Do people feel like the opt-out piece is hard to explain to families? That when they're opting out of just their basic information, their name being sent over to the district, and that they can change their mind at any time. It's not an automatic, you know, have to follow through with an evaluation or go to preschool. Is that difficult for families to understand, do you think?
Oh, I think definitely. Even they tell me, like, oh, at any time you can change your mind, and then we'll just send it on. Yeah, I think that, you know, you talk about it, but they're just, oh, but they have my name now, and, you know, yeah, I think that is really difficult for families. Maybe some more guidance on what opting out would look. And I mean, I tell them, like, oh, if next week you changed your mind, or if, you know, right when the child turns 3 you can start the referral process. You can do Part B eligibility. whenever you decide to do it. It's just our timelines will be different, you know.
Right.
It just
Anybody else
have
have
a lot of
fun opt-out? Sorry, I interrupted somebody.
No, that's okay. I just was saying it opens up just more dialogue about it instead of it just sort of being a natural flow of this is what we do next. And it involves, you know, the provider often chimes in, and we've had providers saying, well, I don't think you're going to be eligible for Part B services. And then we get into the discussion of families will want the evaluation anyway to say how good their child is doing. And, you know, again, it's at the best use of time and money when we're saying, really, we think this child's ready to exit. And so different conversations come up because of that form and the opt-out kind of dialogue.
That's interesting. We've got a chat. Natalie says what she finds difficult is coordinating with the school district in regards to scheduling children for Part B evaluations or screenings. And when a child who does qualify for Part B services through the school district, it's not always clear when the child will actually start. It does not seem to consistently be as early as the child's 3rd birthday, even when the traditional school year is in session. Does anybody else have experience with that type of a situation? So when a child exits from Part C into the preschool special education services, the school district's responsibility is to ensure that an individualized education plan is in place by the child's 3rd birthday. And in that plan, it will talk about when the child will actually begin the Part B special education services. So it might be helpful to have conversations with the school districts about how that looks for families so they might be prepared. Because it may not necessarily be if they're very close to the end of the school year. Those might be discussions that need to be had, and that is the purpose of the representatives of the school districts being at the conference. It is one of the specific activities they need to do is talk about when the child, what services will look like for the child once they turn 3. And then we've got comments that child finds telling the service coordinator that they don't agree with the child being referred, even though the mom and the provider thought there were concerns. It is your responsibility to refer if you believe the child is potentially eligible, and so you're doing the right thing. We're writing all this down so we can follow up with some better guidance, and Lenita works really closely with CDE and the representatives from there to talk about these types of situations that come up. Oh, and then, so Haley had an idea around when families that want an evaluation to see how well their child is doing. She's been having some success with letting them know that their provider will be conducting an evaluation for the exit child outcome summary rating and can share that information with them rather than having a formal evaluation completed by ChildFind. And that is an excellent suggestion, and it really does tie that child outcomes summary process in with the transition. We like that idea. Oh, and there's an issue too about sometimes the provider can't participate in a Part B evaluation. Can you talk a little more about that, Sarah?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Sarah. So I've just noticed that one thing, our preschool teams often want to have a report from current service providers or have the service providers actually attend the evaluation, and it's not an option with our service providers' schedules and lack of availability or what have you, and that can be challenging for the family as well as the team who's looking at what services this child's really going to need
right.
in the future.
Well, we certainly would expect the provider to provide information to the child find teams, but I don't think there would ever be an expectation that they attend.
Okay.
They can, but they don't have to.
Okay. Okay. So a written report would be fine if we can get them to do that?
I'm sorry, what?
A written report would be fine if we can get
them to
agree.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
We did have a provider state that they feel biased with doing an evaluation and making recommendations for the child outcome summary process. Is that what you're talking about, Eric?
I'm guessing here, Eric, that what you're talking about, if you're talking about a provider, an early intervention provider, the early intervention provider is always providing information that informs the transition process because they have a lot of information about the child at that time. So it's always the early intervention provider's responsibility to talk about and the family, situations in which the child is successful, situations that the child finds challenging. All of that information is important for the transition process. But if you're talking about the participation of a provider from the administrative unit, then their responsibility is to talk about, to attend the conference and talk about program options. So I may be misunderstanding what your concern is.
Eric, are you able to unmute and get on the call piece of the webinar?
Yeah, I can. So when completing a transition conference with a family, a speech and language pathologist had said when I had used what Haley was saying earlier, I had recommended that there would be a COAST coming up that they would be completing. They would be gathering some information to complete that COAST, and they could be sharing that with the family, and that might help the family determine if they want to move forward with getting that Part C evaluation or Part B evaluation or not. And then when I said that, the provider felt uncomfortable with the idea of that swaying the family in any way, or she felt that she'd be biased in doing that or talking about that transition with the family based on the assessments that she was doing, which I guess I said, again, it's more probably a provider issue than it is an overall issue that I'm running into a lot. I think it's more that specific provider.
Well, the decision really should be made by the team as to whether they believe the child is potentially eligible or not.
Right.
Right? And so is the provider afraid that by providing that information it will change that decision as to whether the child is eligible?
That she may bias that decision just based on their personal relationship, so that by doing those assessments and saying possibly, yes, there is that significant delay in speech, I see it, you probably should move forward with the eval, or saying the opposite of, actually this delay isn't significant anymore, he's more in the age-appropriate range, that would sway them away from doing that eval. So she feels like she didn't want to be really going over that COSF exit assessment in any way to be looking at the transition possibilities either. So we just decided as a team to move forward with doing the eval at that point.
It is their responsibility to share that information with the family, so you did the right thing by going ahead and moving on.
Right.
Yeah, it's really the provider's responsibility to provide information to the parent about what the child looks like now. So if the child is functioning at typical developmental levels, that information should be shared with the parent. You don't have to make recommendations for moving on to evaluation, but that's information that should be shared.
Right. So the decision is really, is the child potentially eligible or not? And if they're not potentially eligible, then you wouldn't make that referral on. So then at the end of the day, when they share the child outcome summary evaluation information, then it's just giving the family more information. So, are there any conversations that are happening with families around not wanting to have a conference because they don't know whether the child is going to be eligible for preschool education services? Is that an issue for people? Did I make sense when I was asking that question? Is it sometimes a barrier for families to be enthusiastic about a transition plan or conference if they're just not sure whether their child is going to be eligible for preschool special education services?
Yes, this is Corina. We think that, families think 2 years and 3 months is too early to start thinking about that. And they don't know if they're going to be eligible.
Okay. Anybody else? We had a message from Kim in the chat box that the only time that has happened is when a parent was an SLP and she knew her son would not qualify. I'm not sure what, Kim, you're saying that what happened, that maybe the team thought the child was potentially eligible and the mother did not? All right. Any final comments about transition?
Hi, yeah, this is Alicia from Community Connections. We have sort of a side question about the coast.
Okay.
We just had sort of a, oh my gosh, moment where all of our coordinators are here talking, and we're wondering, do we still have to do an entry COSIS if we know a child is going to be in program less than 6 months?
No.
Yes, thank you.
That's an echo in here from Christy and Lenita.
No, a child must be in services at least 6 months in order to have an exit rating. So if you know that the child is not going to be in services for 6 months, you do not need to do an entry rating. You could if you wanted for practice purposes, but it'll get thrown out. We wouldn't count that. All right. Any final comments about transition? Anything you want to know that's challenging? If there was anything we could do on our end to make that process more clear or, easier for you, what would it be? All right, Beth Cole, I see you're on the call.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Will you introduce yourself, and then Beth's going to talk with you a little bit about the funding hierarchy.
Yay. I'm Beth Cole. I'm the Fiscal Accountability Coordinator, and so I oversee ensuring that CCBs are using their funds appropriately and following the funding hierarchy. And I realized that, can you go back to the last slide, please?
Oh, sorry, that was my fault.
Oh, Lenita, shame on you.
No, it's great.
So I realized that talking to families about the funding hierarchy and especially explaining the health insurance authorization form and the family guide to the coordinated system of payments can be very challenging, just because of how it's worded. So So let's just start out with, what are your challenges with talking to families about finances and financing and the coordinated system of payments and funding hierarchy and all of that? So does this mean there's no challenges and I can be done?
What are people's thoughts about when you have to talk to families about the funding hierarchy, and when you're talking to them about the fact that you'll be accessing their insurance or trying to access Medicaid with their consent?
Are we talking to families about the funding hierarchy?
I would hope so. Obviously, some families are either not understanding the funding hierarchy.
Is someone else talking?
Those two.
I can talk?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I just think it's so complicated, and when you've already gone through like a whole initial IFSP, and everybody's pretty done. They're pretty fried. And you might have kids that are, other kids, siblings, everybody, they're done. And then to try to explain that they're checked out, and they just want their child to get the services. So, you do try to explain it, but it is such a complicated thing anyway, and there's so many if this, but then you do that, but if it's this, then you do that, it's really not practical, is all I'm saying, is to really provide a good explanation, just because of time limitations, and that's all I have to say. But I don't like it there ever to be dead silent, so I had to say something.
Me too.
Okay.
So when do other people talk about the whole funding and obtain permission, the parents' consent? Do you find that there's a time that you can do it where parents are asking more questions, where it seems to flow better?
Well, it doesn't need to happen when you're talking about supports and services and how they're going to be funded. So wouldn't it have to happen at your IFSP meeting at the end when you discuss that? I think my challenge in our community is we don't have a lot of providers. There's not a lot of choices. And so we have, we would say this one hospital that we do contract with providers. And, they've told families, you should do each one will pay your deductible before you even, they've sent us the referral because they need, really sometimes they fill a funding source. And they've seen this child long before they even referred them into the early intervention services. And then we get them, they're like, yeah, I want my insurance because they've heard that we cover deductibles. I'm like, no. Then you discuss what the amount of the deductible is, of course, and whether it's more cost savings for either to do early intervention or pay out the deductible that way. But I just, a lack of providers that could bill more insurance and Medicaid and how to get them on board to want to do that. So that's it seems like our issue in our areas.
Right. And you do have to discuss the nitty-gritty of the funding when you are talking about services. But if you are one of those communities that does a home visit ahead of time, you can talk about the funding hierarchy and at least start laying the groundwork for this is how we pay for these services. They're not really free. And I think it's important to get that message across that just because families aren't necessarily paying in to these services, these are not free services. And I think that helps families have a little bit more add a little bit more value to what is being provided when they see that, oh, my insurance is going to be paying for it just like if I went to just the speech therapist down the street. So it has the same value as the speech therapist down the street because it is being paid for. So I think it's important to at least introduce the funding hierarchy early in your conversations with families. And then when you're asking them to, provide parent consent to use their insurance, that happens when you're actually talking about, the specific services and everything.
Beth, this is Christy. Are you on the webinar as well?
I am.
Or audio. Can you see the chats? If you can't, we read them. I just didn't know if you wanted to manage reading the chats or if you want us to.
There's a lot of chats.
Yeah, we've got a few questions. We're happy to sort of go through them and then just bring them up, but I didn't know if that was your preference.
It would probably be easier if you guys could read through them.
Okay, you go ahead and we'll sort them and bring them up. Do you want to go through your slides first and then get back to the chat?
Well, I just have one other slide, and it's talking specifically, yeah, let's go to the next slide, and I can talk about that and some of the details. When we put together the Coordinated System of Payment Family Funding Guide, we had to make it acceptable to the Office of Special Education Programs, which provides our federal funding. And so they required us to take a very broad look at all of the federal Medicaid requirements. And each state can determine their own requirements and their own details. And so some of the things that are in our family guide are there because they go along with the federal requirements, but don't necessarily fall in line with what our state Medicaid has decided. For instance, on the second page where you have your first block of bullets where it says your written consent is needed to use your or your child's Medicaid or CHP Plus to pay for EI services, if that would potentially, and then there's 4 bullets. When I talked with our Medicaid person, she said that in Colorado, none of those bullets apply. And then the very last bullet on page 2, you have the right to refuse to allow providers to bill Medicaid if you're concerned about the potential impact on your private health insurance coverage. If you are duly insured and your consent is, if you're duly insured, again, that situation would never arise in Colorado. And so it's some of those details when you're thinking about explaining this to families that it's important to say that in Colorado, because of how Colorado Medicaid works, these things really aren't an issue. And then on the very last page where it talks about lifetime caps and loss of benefits. Now with the Affordable Care Act, that was supposed to change all of that lifetime caps and loss of benefits, and it does for most insurances, but there are a few insurances that have been exempted from those requirements, and so that's why this is still in here, because there are a few insurances, and it's very, very few, like probably less than 1%, that really fall under that lifetime cap issue. And so I think it's important for families to know that really when we say this, we're saying this because this document has to be approved by our federal people who are looking in the broader across the nation sense of what is needed across the nation. And so if you have questions, to shoot to me, Lanita?
Yep. Okay. So we have I'm going to read a few comments, and then we'll give you the questions. And so Eric says that they provide a handout, and then they have a laminated hierarchy that they go line by line in, and then they open it up to the family to share where they fall in the hierarchy and go from there. So that's actually a great idea.
Yeah.
Kim says they need a better way to have a way to secure and encrypt a copied scan to send to the insurance agencies.
And that would be through your own CCB and your IT department. Because I realize getting the approval back from the insurance companies is an ongoing challenge. And being able to do it through email seems to work a little bit better, but you have to have the ability to send encrypted email.
And then she followed up that faxing is a little more difficult, so that's a good tip, Beth. Then we had a comment from Kelly, that we do intake meetings to go over the paperwork, including the help form. I don't know if you meant the help insurance authorization form. And Jessica as well tries to talk about it during the initial conversation. And that way, if they have questions, they can ask during the evaluation. And Eric brings it up over the welcome packet, and Jessica liked that. So April would like more clarity on how it affects insurance policies, and I'm thinking you meant Medicaid, April. Is that correct? How does Medicaid impact insurance policies?
No, actually, I would like just the private insurance policies.
What is your question about private insurance policies?
So when we have them fill out the information for the insurance authorization, a lot of parents have questions on how this will affect their overall insurance policy.
Okay, it does not. The legislation, if it is in the trust, it will not impact their insurance policy at all. If we access their insurance and it is a non-qualifying plan, so it's not in the trust, then it goes back to it's subject to co-pays and deductibles. And so those all come into play if the provider is just billing United or Aetna and the plan is a self-funded plan, so it's not in the trust. But with the Affordable Care Act, again, there are no more lifetime caps, and so families should not be worrying about that. The issue still tends to be when families are trying to access like 20 or 40 visits through their insurance, and then they come to EI, and we find out that their plan is in the trust. That's when it gets to be a problem, because then the insurance company will try and recover funds from the provider who billed because they should have been billing through the trust. And so that's why I really encourage you to talk to families at the outset about the whole insurance authorization form, that it really helps us to access all funding sources that are available for early intervention, but families can't essentially double dip. If their card says CODOI, then they are in the trust, and anything early intervention services that are covered really need to be on the IFSP. Otherwise, the insurance company is going to try and recover funds from the provider.
Okay, we have another question. I want clarification in the family guide on what are federal Medicaid requirements versus state Medicaid? What is the
everything in the family guide relates to the federal Medicaid requirements, which is why I was pointing out the ones that don't really apply under Colorado's Medicaid.
And Beth, if we tried to clarify that, that would be an issue with OSEP?
Yes, it would. And I'm going to try and revise the family funding guide this coming year. And so hopefully the next version of this guide will be easier to read and understand what really applies in Colorado and what doesn't.
Okay, we've got time for one more question, and then we've got one more thing we need to talk about really quickly. So there's a question about Medicaid requires, if a family has primary insurance or private insurance, Medicaid requires that we bill primary insurance first. I'm not reading this verbatim, I'm just summarizing it. And so if the family signs a declination form that they don't want their private insurance billed, then will Medicaid allow the services to be billed to Medicaid?
That's one that I will have to double check with my contact over at Medicaid. My guess is that they will not allow Medicaid to be billed until there is an actual denial from the insurance company.
I think you're probably right, Beth. All right.
But I will double check and get that out to everyone or put it on the Padlet.
Okay. And then we also had a question about the use of TRICARE in the Denver area, and I'm going to say we did not do a slide with everybody's contact information, but please email Beth with additional questions that you have. She collects these questions and is doing a great job following up on any issues around funding and utilization of insurance and Medicaid. And so it's beth.cole@state.co.us, and all of our contact information is on the website. So please feel free to let Beth know if you have additional questions. This is a great topic. And anything else, Beth?
Just if you're having issues with either getting a response from the insurance company, or if your providers are having issues getting denials or getting paid, let me know. And the more detail you can provide to me, the better able I am to help resolve issues.
Thank you, Beth, for participating. For anybody that doesn't know, Beth is participating by phone from Steamboat. She's at the Alliance Conference.
And I'm talking about more funding stuff tomorrow morning.
All right. Thank you so much, Beth.
Bye.
All right. So a follow-up to this phone call, we just wanted to let everybody know that's participating in this call what our next steps are going to be. And as we mentioned earlier, we're going to have the PowerPoint as well as any available resources posted on the EI Colorado website under Training and Technical Assistance, monthly TA calls. And Lenita, you're going to have a link to Padlet, correct? Yes. And that's a really fun resource that Lenita discovered and has been using as much as possible. And I have one final topic I want to talk about. This is really quick, but I wanted to let all of you know that the Colorado Department of Human Services and the Office of Early Childhood will be conducting a statewide tour, and they're going to be visiting counties and programs across the state, and our executive management team with CDHS really want to talk about the difference we're making through the Office of Early Childhood programs. And each office has selected one of our performance measures, and hopefully you all are aware that we do report on a monthly basis to our executive management team our progress on timely services, among other things. But our office director wants to talk about the positive benefits for families that we serve that get timely services, and they want some personal stories. And so I really felt like, since this call was coming up, that the best resource for finding positive family stories would be from service coordinators. And what we really want is some personal stories of, if you've worked with a family and you've been able to get services started for them really fast, what difference does that make for families? And if you have a personal story to share, I would love to hear it. We, of course, would keep it confidential, but we just want to hear some anecdotal stories around the difference that getting early intervention services started quickly is making for families. You know, we hear a lot about, oh, this is what we've done to resolve the issues around services not beginning timely, but we really want to hear those success stories about, I had a family that came in, that was referred, and we were able to get services started, and this is what a difference it made for that family. So if you have personal stories, I would love you to email them to me, and my contact information is up here. And again, you can always find it on the website. If I could get those stories by Monday, it would be great, because we would just love to be able to share some really positive experiences that families have had by all the hard work that you all do. All right.
Well, thank you all so much for taking time out of your day to join us on this call today. I hope that it was helpful. We would like to offer these calls periodically if you find them beneficial. And if you do, please give the feedback to your coordinators so that we can plan more in the future. Thanks so much.
Hello?